Good morning. Welcome and thank you for being here today. We are going to have a conversation about aging at this particular time in human history. And I am privileged to be joined by Michael Eisner, Mark Friedman, Paul Irving, and Joanne Jenkins, and engaging in this conversation. My name is Laura Karstensen. I am a professor of psychology at Stanford University, and I'm the founding director of the Stanford Center on Longevity. The mission of the Center on Longevity is to change the nature of human aging. We are actively involved in bringing the best of social, biological, medical science to bear on solving the challenges and the problems that people face as they grow older, and working with technology development to use technology to compensate for the problems that we cannot solve with psychology and biology and medical science. I'm happy to look out at this audience that people aren't chuckling when I say that we're going to change the nature of human aging, because when we started saying this a few years ago, that was largely the response. At Stanford, when you say things like that, people go, cool, okay, let's go. And so we truly have started, and I don't think I really have to tell this particular group that the potentials of science and technology at this point in human history are truly breathtaking. So we can and we will change the nature of human aging. We have to, because the first centenarians of the 22nd century are here. They're living among us. They're those little children in nursery school swinging on the swings and playing on the play structures. And it is our job, indeed I believe it is our duty, to build a world so that they can be supported fully through 10 and more decades of life. Given the many possibilities and the opportunities that we have been presented with because of the scientific and technological advances that our ancestors made in the 20th century, they essentially handed us a gift of 30 extra years of life with no strings attached, said here. So the opportunities are remarkable. But when you talk about human aging, most people aren't saying, wow, isn't that cool? We're going to grow really, really old. In fact, people are very ambivalent about aging. And I think that's because humans are creatures of culture. We are exquisitely sensitive to culture. Culture tells us when to get an education, when to marry, when to work, when to retire. Culture guides us through life. And we added these extra years of life so fast that culture hasn't had a chance to catch up. What we did, reflectively, was to simply tack all these extra years on at the end. And so the only time in life that's gotten longer is old age. And I haven't ever talked to anybody who said that the best way to use 30 extra years of life is to just make old age longer. So here we have this extraordinary opportunity. The health and the functioning of the elderly is improving rapidly. The elderly today, people 65 and older, are the best educated, the most functionally fit and physically healthy generations of older people who have ever lived in the history of humankind. The question we really should be asking ourselves is, what are these added years for? What can we do to make sure that longer lives improve quality of life at all ages? Bottom line is, why? Why do we have these extra years? What's the purpose of them? And what kind of purpose can we actively construct so that living longer means life gets better? Mark? I don't know anybody who has been leading the cultural movement for more skillfully or longer than you have, and asking people, challenging people to really develop a new stage in life that's about purpose and meaning, stage in life that's about giving back, about improving the world. Tell us a little bit about encore.org and what you've been trying to accomplish.
You know, Laura, you talked about the need to transform what's possible in later life, and I think at encore.org, what we're trying to do is lift up an already existing movement of millions and millions of older Americans who are dedicating themselves to what we've been calling an encore career at the intersection of passion, purpose, and a paycheck, a second act focused on the greater good, and particularly the greater good as it improves prospects for future generations. And we've shown in research in recent years that 9 million people are already in those encore careers. It's not just Mayor Bloomberg and Bill Gates and President Carter, but ordinary people who are forging a whole second act that involves doing some of their best work, but 31 million more want to move in the same direction and are trying to get from what's last to what's next. And these encore careers last about 10 years in duration. So I'm not a math whiz, but I think if you take 40 million and you multiply it by 10, you're talking about 400 million years of human capital that could be applied to some of the most difficult challenges facing the society today. So we're trying to shine a spotlight on that movement and also to help people who have that aspiration get from aspiration to action.
And encore.org has been giving a purpose prize.
Yes.
Which I found just remarkable. It's a remarkable culture changer. So this is like the MacArthur Genius Prize, but the purpose prize is given to somebody 60 or older who's improving the lives of people in their communities. And how has the prize been having the effect that you hoped it would?
I should probably ask my colleagues, because this is a panel of Purpose Prize judges, so I'm a little sheepish saying it, but we started the Purpose Prize a decade ago essentially as an act of defiance. We described it as the opposite of a Lifetime Achievement Award, an investment in what somebody 60 years old or older is going to do next.
Yeah.
We give out $500,000 prizes the first year. We worried whether we'd have enough candidates. At the end of the day, we had 1,200 that first year. So we had to create a fellowship for the next 5%. We had 3 MacArthur Genius Award winners who were in the fellows that didn't make it to the finals. Since then, this year we celebrated our 10,000th nomination at 500 winners and fellows, and I think it's just a testimony to how wrong we've been about the possibilities of later life. Not only is this not a gray wave of greedy geezers, but also it shows that innovation and experience can go hand in hand. And people are, in many ways, they're not really reinventing themselves, but they're drawing very heavily on their midlife experience and applying it in new ways to new ends.
There's reason to believe that this can happen in the psychology literature. That is, that as people reach their 50s and 60s, they begin to focus on meaning, and they care more about helping others. You know, they've sort of helped themselves up to where they are and can begin to turn their attention to improving life. Mark and I have had wonderful conversations about the possibilities. You know, we sort of see older generations as the cavalry coming over the hill and solving the many problems that are plaguing us today. But on more serious moments, we've also wondered if we can scale this movement to a point that it really changes the world in the kind of profound ways we believe that it could. How are you feeling these days about the scalability issue?
I'm really concerned, not about the potential. I was thinking, as you asked that question, about a billboard I used to drive by from one of the financial services companies on my way home from work, and it said the first person to live to 150 has already been born. And then the punchline is prepare for a longer retirement.
Yeah.
What a waste, an 85-year retirement. I thought it was going to be hard to sustain 20 years. So we've got the cavalry coming over the hill in vast numbers, living vastly longer lives. But we don't have the social innovation that goes with the technological and medical innovation and investment. And as a result, the kind of vehicles that could help people on a mass scale live lives of purpose and legacy just don't exist. I was at a Milken gathering earlier, or actually last year after the conference, and it called for a boomer corps. I think it's a great idea. We should have a call to action to millions of boomers. The Eisner Foundation has been highlighting intergenerational programs that have the potential to bring together assets and needs in ways that could be transformative. I think we're just beginning to crawl on the social innovation side, and we're going to have to up our game as the longevity innovations continue apace.
You know, when I think about culture, I think we don't have much time to do this, that there is an urgency, because as the boomers move through old age, we will set and write new cultural scripts, and to the extent that we can write innovative, productive new ones, we will have come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Michael's work on intergenerational relations, and I want to start by asking you about that and the work of the Eisner Foundation, and how you, I guess my first question is, how did you come to a special focus on intergenerational relationships in the foundation? It's unusual, as you know, in the foundation world to focus on the young and the old together. How did that happen?
Well, I came to it as a movie guy and an English major, so with no credentials. And I spent my life reading scripts, and I saw in my workplace tremendous emphasis on youth culture, but I grew up in a family where I saw people discarded in their aging process, either discarded emotionally or discarded in the most disgusting facilities one has ever seen. People who were still vital, intelligent, maybe somewhat infirm. And then when I went to Disney, it was in chaos, and everybody was talking about how bad everybody was. And I had seen other companies where new management comes in and they get rid of everybody and they throw everybody out. And we had 3 ex-CEOs and others that had been on the board, and I was advised to get rid of them.
Oh.
Aged, politically bad, I'm the new guy, 40 years old.
Yeah.
And I thought that was wrong, and they all stayed on the board, and it was incredible. The institutional knowledge, the wisdom, let's see, Disney opened in 1965. What was it like as we were opening new parks? And I learned about women's heels getting stuck in the asphalt and the water not working and everybody going crazy in 100 degrees. And all of a sudden I'm realizing these people who have been around forever not only have knowledge, but have, I used to say to our executives, we want you to make a mistake. Just don't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah.
And when you have people that have made the same mistake involved, and the relationship between the young, the passionate, and the older, more practical, that kind of marriage is 1 and 1 adds up to 5.
Yeah.
And so it seemed to me that as we spent our lives getting toilet trained, and then preschool, and then grade school, and then high school, and then degrees, and then you're an intern, and then you're an assistant, and then you're this. Everything is toward learning. And then one day they say, you've learned enough, goodbye. And it just seemed like society was culturally, in this country, because it's not that true elsewhere, that's in the public market. Mm-hmm. But in the home, you would see, whether it's the inner city where grandparents are actually bringing up children, or multi-family immigration families where the grandparents are still living at home, and you see this combination. So our foundation started off with dealing with people who couldn't represent themselves, i.e. children. And then we realized that another group that couldn't really represent themselves adequately, didn't have the voice, the passion, the craziness that he has. And then we saw institutions around the country that put the two together, grandparents tutoring kids. This is a long-winded answer, how we got to, over a decade, do this. Then I wrote a book about partnerships. And in this research for the books, I discovered a Harvard longitudinal study, 75-year study, the longest longitudinal study in history. Granted, it was only of rich men who went to Harvard beginning in 1938, so it was 75 years of rich men, but still it was a longitudinal study. And the longitudinal study was geared to find out what makes people happy.
Yeah.
Kind of a simple, interesting idea. It was actually started by, I think, the guy who ran Sears. He wanted happy,
Yes.
happy managers, but it evolved.
Yeah.
And they discovered 4 things. They discovered, number 1, relationships. Inter-family relationships was a very important thing that made people happy. 2, don't dump your siblings. People that dumped their siblings, even though they were the idiot brother or whatever, felt unhappy about that. The third, and I think very important, was the whole idea of mentoring.
Yeah.
A person who's come to an age where he can actually bestow wisdom on the next generation. These 3 things created happiness.
Mm-hmm.
A society that is happy, that's well fed, that works together seems to be a good society. Now, a byproduct of that study for 75 years, and granted these were men, not women, and wealthy men, were that, which I thought was interesting, which I did not put in my book, was that liberal men had sex going deep into their 80s, and conservative men ended sex at 68 years old.
Did you change your political views?
No, I was already on that side of the spectrum. But I thought that would be a good campaign for Hillary, to make sure, well, we know, never mind. I won't go further. Anyway, so all of that together with Trent Stamp, who runs our foundation, and my wife, Jane, brought us to an idea that as people live 30 years longer, and they can mentor, they can continue to work. Yes, physical incidents occur, but that doesn't mean mentals always occurs. And the political adolescent idea of absolute immortality and perfection, we have to teach younger people that their day will come.
Yeah.
And it's important to work, whether it's mentoring or whatever. So that's how we got into it.
It's fascinating. Yeah. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, there's so much discussion in society today about older people taking all the goods and leaving nothing for children. And the way that you're talking sounds like older people, the presence of older people could be the best thing that ever happened to children. We need to make it work that way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because people live such a short amount of time in biblical eras. So when Corinthians wrote, when you're a child, you act as a child, you walk as a child, you learn as a child, but when you're an adult, you give up childish ways.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything in Corinthians that talks about when you're 150,
Yeah.
what you should be doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're geared to a short, healthy life
Yeah.
culturally,
Yeah.
and I think that has to be addressed.
Yeah. There's another longitudinal study going on at Harvard, and I spoke to one of the psychiatrists involved in this project, and he had said that the best predictor of a child doing well in life is the presence of an adult in addition to parents. So somebody other than their parents, could be a grandparent, but somebody, it doesn't have to be a relative, who is crazy about them. And to the extent that children have somebody in their life who's looking out for them, telling them they're special, really caring about them, it's one of the best predictors of that child's development. And for the first time in history, as you're saying, lives used to be short. We didn't used to have enough people around to assign that task to every child. We do now. So we need to get ready for it. Thank you. Paul.
Laura.
Everybody in this room knows Paul for his work with Milken. Maybe not everybody knows yet about your new role as CEO of the Center for the Future of Aging. And this aging movement that we're talking about has become your encore career, in a sense. And when I listen to you speak and read your writings about aging societies, I'm always struck in the breadth with which you see change coming and change needed. So when you talk about aging societies, in the same breath, you're talking about civil society. Make those connections for us.
Well, I mean, Laura, to get back to maybe the beginning of your remarks, so we know, I assume everyone in the audience knows, there are about 78 million baby boomers in the United States, about 10,000 a day turning 65, and the United States, while it's aging, is aging actually less rapidly than much of the rest of the world. So my view is the two most important challenges and opportunities that we face as human beings today are climate change in the physical world and aging in the human world. And for those of us, how many baby boomers in the audience? I assume a fair number. So a lot of us, maybe it's the egocentrism of our generation, tend to think that we just represent this unusual lump kind of moving through the demographic snake, and that once we're done, we return to normal, but actually nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, these days, as demographers know, just again in the United States, the millennial generation has passed us. There are about 84 million millennials. I was actually in the office a couple days ago with a group of young people in their 20s and 30s. We were talking about the impacts of longer lives for them, and I said to them, so what happens if the longevity scientists are right? So Google has funded Calico, run by Art Levinson, who's the chairman of Apple Computer and former chairman and CEO of Genentech, and Craig Venter, who will be here on Wednesday, is in his lab in San Diego, and there are people across the country. So even if you discount, and somebody I think said, Mark, you talked about the billboard at 150, so even if you discount the possibility of that, although by the way, there are plenty of people who believe that's the case, and simply assume the potential of acceleration in aging, 85, 90, 95, 100, 110, 120, the challenges for our children and the challenges for their children and the opportunities they have to take advantage, again, of this longevity dividend that Laura referenced is absolutely remarkable. I'm glad Michael referenced religion, because Mark and I have actually had a series of talks at faith institutions, and one of the things that we've run into is discussions with leaders who recognize that actually conventions that certainly in the Abrahamic religions that we've become used to, you know, the various passages, celebration of birth, and sometimes passage to adolescence, by the way, a 20th century invention, and marriage and death, and kind of nothing else, right? If you think about it, so if you're the pastor of a church, or you're a priest, or if you're a rabbi, you think to yourself, how are you going to keep people involved and keep them interested? Well, what you realize is all these conventions were developed at a time when lifespans were dramatically shorter. So in the last 150 years, we've had a doubling of lifespan. And so what does that mean, not just for our social institutions and business and a lot of other things, but even things like religion and relationships, as I said to my son not too long ago. So what happens if folks at your age end up in 80-year marriages? How does that feel? And boy, that started a conversation. So
Divorce rate's been going up.
divorce rate's been going up.
Yeah.
So I think many people, you know, in many ways, aging is like the old adage of the frog in the boiling water. You know, this is not one of those things that we're kind of dropped in, so we're hopping out. It's happening all around us. It's happening every day. By the way, our parents, those in the greatest generation, have lived and are living longer than anticipated, and as a result, they end up in very sadly in many of the kinds of places that Michael referenced earlier. So what are we doing? And I'm always kind of interested in calls to action. What are we doing in the business cohort, in the policy group, in media, and in so many other domains to address what's really going to be a radically different world that we're entering. And again, I'm glad to see some younger people in the audience, because this is very much not just a conversation for people interested, as I am, in chronic disease and Alzheimer's. It's very much not just a conversation for baby boomers. This is a conversation for Gen Xers and millennials and the Gen Z generation coming up now, teenagers, and will be for their children and grandchildren. It'll be a really interesting world.
It is true, and aging societies are not about old people. I would say that young people today have more of a stake in this longevity era, not less. The elderly today are not going to be changed too much one way or another. But science and technology, in the way that you were describing, Paul, with advances in the slowing of biological aging, changes in technologies that are going to allow people to work from anywhere, and so I mean, they will be affected profoundly, for better or for worse. I challenge the students at Stanford all the time to say that they will bear the burden or reap the riches of the work that will go on around longevity and aging.
I would also say just one more comment, because I want to get to Joanne, but you know, at our global conference, we have a lot of very, very successful people who are entrenched and involved and committed to and passionate about their primary careers. But I think one of the reasons why it's so important to have Michael on stage today, obviously an extraordinarily successful guy in his primary career, but thinking about how now he can change and contribute, and how that shaped his philanthropy, et cetera. So I would just counsel all those, you know, who are kind of in the midst, in the depths, you know, the understandable commitments that we all have in our lives, to recognize not only the possibility but the likelihood of these life changes, which will also reflect changing personal priorities. You know, you referenced generativity, Laura, and I think what happens is, and it's certainly happened to me and to a lot of other people I know, what's really important changes.
Yeah, and it comes clearer as we get older. Thank you. Joanne, I have to say that in the world that, you know, we live in, this aging world, there is palpable excitement about your being at the leadership, at the helm of AARP. So AARP has been viewed by many, probably most, for better or for worse, as the keepers of the guard, protecting the lives that older people are living as they have been. And you come in, not new to AARP, because you've worked in the for-profit, nonprofit, you've been in sort of every part of AARP, but you come in now as the leader of this very large institution, and you're talking about disrupting aging, and you're talking about, forget about chronological age, let's talk about function and so on, and it's shaking things up. What are you going? How is AARP going to be different with you leading it?
Well, I would say I don't think we're going to stray away from the keeper of the garden, but I also think it's a huge opportunity for us to think about aging in a very different way than we've approached it in the past. And this whole conversation about how we think about aging and how we get accepted for who we are, not how old we are.
Yes.
You know, as I hear Mark talk about the encore folks that we celebrate, we're celebrating them because they're older, over 60, and we really don't expect them to do anything. Well, how foolish is that?
Yeah.
You know, how do we start thinking about changing this conversation around what it means to age, and to view people for who they are? We don't accept it for race, for gender, for sex, for financial, but somehow we allow it to happen, and we allow this ageist kind of thinking to go on for people who are 50 and older in this country. And I think what we're trying to do at AARP is to take a fresh look at some of those innovative systems or systems innovations that we need to approach. So to rethink what it means to create policy in society where we're likely to live to be over 80, 90, 150 at some age, when life expectancy some 20 or 30 years ago was late 60s, early 70s. So how do we start thinking about those systems that are in place to take care of us? And how do we use this time to rethink who we are? So I like to say that we're probably going to spend more time in older age than we probably spent raising our own kids.
Right.
And so how do we prepare this whole generation of people who will live another 30, 35, 40 years over the age of 50, and what are they going to do with it? And it is highly likely this whole concept of retirement may eventually go away, because people are not. I know for our 38 million members, almost half of them are still working, whether they want to work or whether they need to work to take care of themselves. And how do we start preparing this generation to use this post 50, 65, whatever you want to start the base at, as finding real meaning and purpose in their lives. And we've certainly tried to look at that at AARP. We have a wonderful program that sort of echoes what Mike talked about and what Mark talked about of Mentor Up, where we're using young people in high schools and colleges to actually go out and mentor an older person on the use of how to use that cell phone, how to use that iPad, how do I Skype with my friends or grandkids or whoever that is we want to communicate with. And to give them a reason for living actively. We certainly want people to live longer and healthier lives. So how do we focus at this time on an area of where people are living healthier lives, not just longer lives and dependency on the healthcare system? How do we think about savings and retirement in a way that we don't outlive our financial means? And then the last piece around finding real meaning and purpose in life. And I think this is key to so much of the work that everyone here has been focused on, because we know that if you are actively engaged, you're happier, you're helping people. And I really do believe that the people who are older in this country have so much to give in terms of experience and value to coming into the workplace, or whether they're volunteering or doing philanthropic work. It makes a meaningful difference in their lives and their lives of the people around them.
I've talked to a lot of older people who tell me they're doing fine. That is, I'm happy, I'm okay with my life, no complaints. But I do feel underutilized. And that's a word that comes up a lot in talking to people, especially affluent people who have done an awful lot and have a lot of potential. Are there policies? And I start with you, Joanne, but this is something I'd like all of you to. Are there policies and or infrastructures that we need to build that taps this resource that's growing, that we've all been talking about? How do we do that? Because what's happening today, it seems, is that there are a few extraordinary people who are out there making this happen on their own. We know them. A lot of you are in this room and on this panel. But most people don't do that. We do look to culture. We sort of say, oh, I'm done now. People, I don't want to get in the way. I want to make way for other people. So, yeah, where do we start? Is it a policy?
Well, I don't know if it's so much a policy, but it is a change in mindset and behavior and culture, particularly for those of us in this country. We know that an older person brings a lot of experience and value to the workplace as we're changing those behaviors of what it is we're trying to do. We also know and think that as we start looking at what are those policies that are in place that prohibit them from actually working longer, living longer, being productive, that there is an enormous amount of room for improvement in how we look at and what are the expectations for the older worker, or just not just working, but think about the tremendous lack of resources we have in caregiving in this country, and what a great attribute this core of whether volunteers or workers who are 50 and older could bring to that crisis. Quite frankly, it's at a crisis at this point in our history about how are we going to service the needs of caregivers in this country. And you can go through that and see that in childcare, in caregiving, in healthcare, in the whole technology revolution. There's an enormous opportunity for us to retrain this workforce that may not be full-time employment, but it could be. And I do believe that we're going to fastly get into an area where people are going in and out of the workplace. And I think there is an opportunity for us to create policy that doesn't just assume that at 62, at 65, you retire and you go home and you go on that vacation. But how do we think about both work and education as a time in which we are going in and out of those? And so it's no longer anymore that the first third is you're spending your life being educated, and then a third educating, and then that latter third of your life thinking about retirement and those kinds of items, but that it is a continuous flow throughout this longevity of living that we are fastly coming accustomed to.
Are there other ways that we can issue a call to arms? Can we do something to activate people? Can we build an infrastructure?
I'll comment. Having spent most of my life as a lawyer, I'll say happily, I think at this stage, being now a recovering lawyer, that the Older Workers Protection Act didn't eliminate ageism any more than, frankly, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 eliminated bias, right? Yeah. So I don't think the answer is a legal answer, and I think that kind of imposing policies and practices is obviously something that should be thought about. But I think ultimately we're talking about culture change. We're talking about this confluence of the need to recognize the value of this human capital asset. Mark Friedman's word, human capital asset. Mark, you should talk about your view about dependency ratios and abundancy ratios. But if we don't figure out a way to operationalize, activate, engage this human capital asset, the negative consequences to our society and societies across the world are massive. So we need to keep people healthier. Joanne referenced the end of retirement. My view is retirement should be retired. Most people in my generation can't afford to retire, tragically. By the way, for those who look at the financial resources of millennials, they have a distressingly low investment and savings rate, understandable in light of their kind of growing up period during the Great Recession. So we have to stop talking about retirement. And for those, and I'm sure there are plenty of people in the financial services industry in the room, I would challenge you to think of a different word, because our objective is to keep people active, engaged. Some people who are fortunate, if you're Michael Eisner, you can form a wonderful foundation and engage in a portfolio of interesting activities. And if you're me, you're lucky enough to end up in an interesting place at the Milken Institute. But for most people, those opportunities don't exist. So we really have to change the way we think about this. And frankly, in doing that, we will create a better, more robust world, a better economy, a longevity economy, a whole series of really positive outcomes. So.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that point and Joanne's comment about we just have to get a lot better at transitions. I mean, the transition at this point used to be to an endless vacation of retirement, but a lot of people I think we need a gap year for grown-ups, right? You know, we give them to young people who've worked so hard in high school. They get a year off. But what about their parents who just have been working 60 hours a week, doing caregiving and raising kids for 30 years? Why not create a new kind of transition period in life and create public policies to help support that? I mean, one of my favorite examples is something called the Troops to Teachers program, which helps retired sergeants mostly who've come from working with unformed 18-year-olds in the middle of a battlefield, and helps them transition to the classroom on the idea that they might do a good job with unformed 17-year-olds. And it's a brilliant program. It's also a chance for social mobility. A lot of people who went into the military because they couldn't go to college the first time around get to go back to school. I think we could do a lot more to expand those kind of ideas. I'll throw out a crazy notion, which is why not be able to take a year of Social Security in your 50s to go back to school, to retool, or to do an internship, and then agree to work an actuarially adjusted period later. I'm sure there's a lot of complications to doing something like that, but if we did that, it would help so many people get the time and space in their life to, not only figure out who they're going to be next, but also what they're going to do.
When we talk about getting rid of retirement, you often hear a lot of groans from people who are thinking, boy, I'm working really hard, and to continue doing this indefinitely doesn't sound appealing. But we also have the opportunity here to change the nature of work, as you're saying, gap years. Economists these days are saying we could pretty easily, in most jobs, go to 4-day work weeks. And a lot of people would be happy to trade those for longer working lives so that we have extra time when our children are young and we're balancing families and work to be able to have more time with the people we love and the work that we're doing.
Right.
Michael, if we're talking about changing culture, here we are in Los Angeles, and I get to have you to talk to here about culture. Film is such a huge part of it, media. What is the role for culture change? And is anybody thinking about it sort of proactively as I'm going to develop some new models here of life?
Well, generally culture in the media follows culture as it really exists. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, I got 3 kids and 8 grandchildren, and they're all helicopter parents.
Yeah.
And they're, they can learn to speak Spanish, and they can play the drum, and they can do ballet, and they can do gym, and they can do everything. There is no, and they're all being prepared, as all kids are, whether they're Head Start programs or they're being prepared to deal with adolescence, deal with not being picked on the baseball team, and understanding that, being picked to get into college or high school, but none of them are being prepared to be old.
Yeah.
And to me, the problem is the culture comes first, the understanding that there are more than 2 parts to life. Freud famously compared the purpose of life being love and work.
Yeah.
And the sense of work is not only work and being active, but that is the place where structure is in your life. That is the place where you have relationships outside the house. And people aren't prepared to have that just end.
Yeah.
And it just does end, and it doesn't always just end with illness. So if we were training our children to not only be adolescents and to be students and to be executives or to be doctors or whatever, if we're training them to be old,
Yes.
and if the movies and television and internet shows and new digital programming and all the things that are happening that are now being driven by content, not by distribution, if people started thinking about situation comedies that enhance that ethic,
Yeah.
the way quitting smoking became a big issue in the media, and most companies decided not to have people smoking on screen. And I don't know whether that caused less smoking or whether the Surgeon General caused less smoking or whether Mothers
Yeah.
Against Smoking did it, but it all is of a texture. What I don't think people understand is the psychological, societal importance of a happy country.
Yeah.
And a happy country is a country that looks after each other, where people continue to work, support mentoring, and all the things we've talked about. So you can legislate it, you can put in all sorts of laws, you can put in the Civil Rights Act, and you still have policemen shooting people. That's not going to do it. What's going to do it is a realizing that people don't become indifferent and useless at 65 and 3 months.
Yeah.
And the, the, the passion and the narcissism of youth, together with the intelligence and practicality of age as a joint venture,
Yes.
seems to me would be a good acquisition for companies and something we at Disney talk about. We talk about getting that Mickey Mouse thing at the hospital room and the Mickey Mouse diapers and grandparents and parents and everybody going to Walt. I mean, we made a commercial that got me in so much trouble. I still love it, but it got me in so much trouble because it was the first commercial we made, and I thought, well, we're going to show this family, and they're going to be having breakfast, and they're running around, and there's a grandparent there, and the grandparent's going off to whatever, and the father's going to work, and the mother's going to work, and the kids are going to school, and they all run out, and they leave the little baby sitting in the thing. And then it says, isn't it time to take a vacation at Walt Disney World?
Oh.
Well, I got killed because it was like, you're leaving your baby sitting there while you go. And guilt, we were putting guilt on everybody.
Oh.
Our sales went like this, by the way. But anyway, the idea of the family that plays together, the family that stays together, can be expanded to an aging population. And until that, these kind of, by the way, I've never been on a conference that has done anything else but talk about Michael Jackson and the Osmond Brothers and Scooby-Doo and you know, Lion King. So this is my first aging conference. But more of these would be effective by younger people than us that are actually thinking about what happens when they get older.
Well, Lion King is a beautiful intergenerational story.
It was. Thank you.
And life cycle story, just beautiful, and really, I think, affected people deeply and affected culture. You know, and when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking we don't ask children questions about what they're going to be when they grow old. We ask them all the time, what are you going to be when you grow up? Are you going to be a mommy? Are you going to be a dad? How many babies are you going to have? You know, we ask those questions all the time. And rarely do we ask the question, what kind of a grandma are you going to be? What kind of a great-grandfather are you going to be?
And if you talk in any of these organizations that deal with the more needy class, the grandparent is such an important part of people's lives. My wife's grandparents lived with her until she got married. And these people, they have great respect inside the home for the grandparents, but they don't realize that they're doing more than making pletta, a Swedish family.
Yes, yes, and that they will be there one day. I mean, that's the continuity I think we're failing to establish. So we have little kids who think their grandparents are great, but are they going to be that?
Yeah, we worry about having an IRA. We worry about having enough money to survive. We worry about exercise and eating well, all physical. But does anybody worry about the state of work and love and happiness at that age?
Well, I want you to know that my granddaughter, when she was 4, I would ask her these questions all the time. I asked both my grandchildren that, what are they going to be when they're grandparents and all, and she ran off after one of these conversations, went into my closet, completely messed it up, coming out with my jackets and shirts and purses and jewelry on, saying, I'm going to dress up like a grandma. I thought that actually, we want kids to begin to think about what they're going to be and look like and act.
She should get the water skis out too.
That's right, that's right. I'm not letting her in that closet. I'm going to keep some things away. But we did a study at Stanford a year or so ago where we age morphed Stanford students so that they looked old, and they went and had an experience in virtual reality for about 30 minutes where it looked like they were in an apartment where there was a mirror on one wall, so every time they moved or turned their head, they would see their old self looking back. And after that experience was completed, we gave them a lot of questionnaires, and embedded among the many questions we asked was, how much money are you going to allocate after a windfall of $1,000 to your retirement account? And after that 30-minute experience of themselves as old people, it more than doubled the amount that they were going to allocate for savings. So I think if we can begin to establish these connections from youth to older ages, people will become better at preparing for themselves at older ages.
I also think it's important for us to think about that whole adolescence, work, retirement, and this new, what we call the age of possibilities, so that people understand and look forward to this phase of their lives as something to look forward to rather than to fear, to think about it in the context of another planning phase, whether it's for financial reasons or health reasons, or just what Michael talked about, this whole happiness of finding real purpose and meaning in what it is you're going to do, and to start to plan for it in a very deliberate way, so that people are, I was reading this article the other day, and they said the fastest growing age segment in this country is people over the age of 85.
Yeah.
And so we obviously are going to, hopefully there'll be a lot of us around at 85 who are thinking about this whole idea of purpose and happiness and finding meaning and doing something that is fulfilling to us, but also about that helps society get better. I mean, we have an enormous amount of issues in this country that this older person would be able to help solve, and I think that collectively, as we come together to bring about solutions, whether it's programs like Encore or some of the other programs that so many of the folks here at this conference are focusing on, it's a huge opportunity for us to use this large spectrum of our society to do good and to give back and to solve some of these issues for a lifetime, not just 2 or 3 years, or not just in one community, but for society as a whole.
I love the idea of planning for this kind of crescendo of life, something that's a powerful sort of accumulation of experience and then deployed in a meaningful way.
And as important as it is for society, when we look at who signs up for what in this conference, one of the things that people are always most interested in is sessions on personal health. What can they do? So, all of us now. I'm wearing my Fitbit. This is not an advertisement. All of us are now talking about our weight and health and exercise. By the way, I saw a disturbing statistic this morning that said one-fifth of Americans did not exercise once last year. You saw that piece. Horrifying. But there's a really, I think, important message relating to the subject matter of this panel, and that is that purpose is good for you.
Yes.
Right? So we know, the research shows that purpose, identification of purpose, sense of purpose, feeling of purpose, action on purpose, actually extends life and extends health span. So as we're running around doing our exercise, and as we're thinking about eating kale, I think one of the things that we all have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing to enhance our purpose, engage purposefully? And the other thing, of course, Laura, I'm interested in is so we know that the two happiest times of life are childhood and old age. So I guess I would kind of particularly challenge those in the midst who are kind of focused today on what the trade will be, or Michael, what show will be greenlit or not, to say if that group of people aren't thinking about that question of purpose, in addition to their diet, in addition to their jog, they're missing something not only important for society, they're missing something important for themselves and their families.
Study after study keeps coming out showing that work, whether paid or unpaid, volunteer or paid work, predicts length of life in addition to physical fitness. Now I've got an idea. I want someone to develop an app, or your purpose app, so you can see how many steps you walked, but when doing something nice for somebody else, looking out or something, that's what we need.
There's a new book out by David Brooks called The Road to Character, and in it he talks about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues, and the resumes we try to build up in contrast to what we want to have people say about us at our memorial service. And I thought if we could only get some of these Silicon Valley gurus to develop a eulogy app, so we can design our own, what it is that we want to have said about us, and then a kind of GPS about how well we're staying true to that. I think it would actually be, because I do think at this point in life, you've talked a lot about the importance of time left to live and mortality as a real guide in terms of what matters in our lives. And I think as we get to this point, we do think about, we get this blessing of another couple decades. What do we want to have said about us at the end and about how we spent those decades?
So one of the things, again, just on the theory of all of us being in this together, because aging is the one thing we have in common, if we're lucky, is social innovations, political innovations, economic innovations to enable some of the things we're talking about more. So, Mark, I know you've talked about individual purpose accounts, and I was joking with somebody a couple months ago about 401ps, so 401 purpose. But so thinking about as we try to develop wealth, as we try to think through our jobs, education, et cetera, the nature of our institutions, Michael talked about, and I was, by the way, really happy to hear that comment about boards, because we know, by the way, that mixed age teams, that older and younger teams consistently, measurably outperform same age teams. So if you're an entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley and you have a skunkworks project in the back of the room, the smart thing to do is not to stick two 30-year-olds with a PhD in computer science in the back room. It's to stick a 30-year-old and a 65-year-old in that same room, and you're very likely to beat the competition. But I think all of us need to think about in our own sectors, in our own silos, in our own domains, what we can do to change policies, practices, norms that enable continued engagement, these more productive, longer lives, healthier, longer lives. It's something I know Joanne and her team are doing regularly, and we need more people involved.
I was going to say, in about 2 weeks, we're going to be launching, I know you guys have heard me talk before about Life Reimagine, about how do we get people to reimagine what they're going to do in this post-50 era. We have now about 1.2 million people who have come to this site. Ironically, the majority of them are in their 40s. It's an ageless kind of platform, but in the next 2 weeks, we're going to launch what we call Life Map. And it's an opportunity to go on to the lifereimagine.org site and fill out your own purpose statement for whatever that is that you want to do at this point in your life, whether it's around working or health or personal relationships, or just filling out that purpose statement that helps you keep track, much like you described, Mark, that will be online available on mobile apps to help you track your purpose in life and what it is you're trying to do. It's a huge void that I think that we have in this country around people helping them to navigate these life transitions, and whether it's taking that gap year off or changing to that part-time work. It's a big area that I think we need to focus on and give people the opportunity to think about what it is they want to do for themselves, instead of telling folks, this is what you should be doing at age 65, you should be doing this, but to help people think through that process in a very deliberate way with a whole ecosystem that gives them all of the options that are available to them. So, exciting.
I'm getting excited about an infrastructure emerging here, from gap years to roadmaps to preparing little children to be old people to having those conversations, apps of all sorts.
I kind of like the sitcom.
I like the sitcom a lot, a lot. The sitcoms could provide these kind of characters that are, you say, that it's reflecting culture, that it's like there are enough people around already to tell the stories about, that you can broadcast them widely. We might be onto something. You never know. I want to thank you very much, Michael, Mark, Paul, Joanne, for joining me today, and thank all of you for being here. It's a terrific conversation. Let's keep it going. Thank you. Thank you.